What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down the second episode in Season 3 of the Paramount Hit TV Show, Mayor of Kingstown. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't gotten around to watching the episode yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. So, at the beginning of this episode, we get another vintage Mike McCluskey voiceover, which is a bit of a deviation from the norm, as those typically only happen in the beginning of the first episode and at the end of the last episode of the season. But, nevertheless, we get another one here. This one about how prison impacts the entire family of the incarcerated party, and about how prison is a business. And look, that's really what this show is about at its core, the business of incarceration. So, Mike McCluskey's voiceover is just kind of reiterating that fact, bringing us back to what it is that we're actually watching. And, as we hear this voiceover, we get another montage. In the first scene, we see a young lady apparently named Sharon visiting with Big Hush at Anchor Bay. We see Gunner is indeed alive, though a little beaten and bruised and still healing from getting jumped last season. And remember, in the first episode, we did hear that he had survived his attack. Stevie kind of says when all the guys are at the diner that Gunner was still alive. So we get to actually see him. We see a middle-aged white woman sitting in Mike's lobby at his office. So, we know she's going to be important to the story told in this episode somehow. We see Mike arriving at his office. We also see police and SWAT vehicles continue to patrol the streets of Kingstown. Now, Ian and Stevie are interviewing what appears to be a perp of some kind, dirty-looking white female, so, probably a drug user. And I think that's going to tie into the episode and kind of what's happening at large. And in this shot, Ian looks absolutely spent. Like whatever is happening in Kingstown or whatever has happened since, Miriam McCluskey's funeral is really, really just kind of weighing him down. He looks just exhausted. We see Carney overseeing the prisoners on the yard as the snow falls. Again, like I said, the setting here is it's wintertime in Kingstown. The snow is falling. So the show really kind of has a cold look about itself right now. We see Iris at the house with Tracy and the baby. And she kind of looks like she's kind of forcing herself to kind of be happy with the life that she's living at this point in time. We see Sharon back at Anchor Bay giving Big Hush 2 bags of potato chips, 2. And it appears that one of them has balloons full of drugs inside. And, so as she's sitting there talking to him, he's, eating the chips, but he's also eating the balloons. And that's how they're smuggling the dope inside the prison. And as she leaves, she kisses him. So I assume she's Big Hush's girlfriend, or at least his jump off. Now, in the next scene, we see Big Hush feeling ill while on the way back to his cell. And one of his fellow inmates takes him into a small electrical shed where he dies almost instantly. And it appears that one of the balloons ruptured inside his stomach. And so, Raphael, who you remember was left in charge by Bunny when he got out of jail, is told of the situation, and he and some of his fellow gang members go into the shed and they put on garbage bags and they surgically remove the balloons from Big Hush's body so that they can go forward with the plan to sell them. I'm like, dang, that was... But, I guess you got to do what you got to do, right? So... basically, we're being shown here that the drugs being smuggled into Anchor Bay are either tainted or the balloon popping inside of Big Hush's body caused him to overdose. This is going to be our A story, or our primary story. Mike will be tasked to figure out what the deal is with the drugs going into the prison. And this will likely be the story that continues throughout most of, if not all, the season. Now, at Mike's office, we see the middle-aged white woman. Her name is Anna Fletcher, played by Paula Malcolmson. And she's one of my absolute favorite actresses, you guys. I really enjoy her on screen. And she has a deceased son, turns out. And it turns out he was killed by a young man named Greg, one of his friends. And Greg, at this point, has done his time for this, and he'll be released soon. But Anna wants Mike to keep the release from taking place, and it appears that she wants this by any means necessary. Now, this is going to be our B story, or, our secondary story. This will likely be the story that will resolve itself somehow by episode's end. Now, Mike calls Carney to ask about his sister, who works at the prison where Greg is being held, so he's not at Anchor Bay. And as Carney texts Mike his sister's number, he gets the call about Big Hush. So, Mike is on the phone, when Carney kind of freaks out and goes to see about Big Hush. And so that's how Mike finds out what's going on. So Mike goes to see Bunny, his bestie, to ask him about the drugs. And Bunny is basically of the mind that, shit happens. Mike asks who was handling the package. Bunny tells him it was a woman named Sharon and that she's one of his girls. Mike wants him to pause distribution, but Bunny basically tells him that, it's too late for all that. This stuff is on the streets. And Mike doesn't seem too happy about it, but, hey, what are you going to do? So next, we see Iris driving Miriam's car through town when she gets pulled over for running a stop sign. And the cop, approaches the vehicle and he asks Iris for her driver's license. And she tells the officer that she doesn't have one, which was kind of weird. I'm like, why in the world would you be driving without a license, especially with everything that you've been through to this point? I just thought it was kind of weird, but, I feel like the story's going somewhere. So she gets into a physical altercation with the cop. And, like I told you guys, Iris was going to be a problem. I absolutely positively knew she was going to be a problem. I just thought we were going to have a little more time before she completely lost her crap. But, episode 2, here we go. Now, this is our C story, and it's often called a runner. And this story will likely last a while, paying off sometime down the line, possibly an episode or 2 before the season finale. So, our girl Iris is about to go down the road, so to speak, which, if you think about it, makes some sense. Since, Mike rebuffed her advances in last week's episode, it's kind of one of those things where, I felt like we were headed for a situation where Mike and Iris were going to spend this season separated somehow. So we'll see what happens there. Now, we then see my man Merle talking to another inmate, a white inmate. And I went and looked on IMDb, and it has him simply listed as Norseman. So that tells me he was probably going to be confined to this one episode and probably only this scene and likely one other. He's likely just here to do something for Merle. So, at this point in the episode, I'm thinking we'll just have to wait and see what that is because Merle is rather cryptic about exactly what he needs him for. On the yard, meanwhile, we see 2 more prisoners have died from the drugs that were cut out of Big Hush and sold. So at this point, we know for sure that there's something wrong with them, that this wasn't just an overdose, but that the drugs are tainted. And Kareem and Carney look on before he tells Carney, and I quote, to lock it the fuck down. Next, we see Bunny getting a mani-pedi from his cousin, and they talk about Sharon. Now, Rhonda tells him that Sharon is good people, but that Sharon's brother isn't. And Bunny asks Rhonda where she is, but Rhonda just doesn't exactly know. And just then Bunny gets a call. We don't know from who, but it's likely from the prison. Because Bunny then calls Mike and tells him the news, but Mike already knows and is on his way to Anchor Bay. And Bunny tells Mike that he thinks Sharon stepped on the product and skimmed enough to set herself up somewhere. And Bunny tells Mike that Raphael will be made vulnerable because of the situation, and Mike promises to try to help him. And, at this point, we find Kareem and Evelyn in the prison parking lot discussing the situation. And as they kind of talk back and forth, they both come to the conclusion that somehow Bunny Washington is involved. Now, Mike shows up at the prison, and he has a secret meeting with Raphael. And Mike tells him to cut a deal with the Mexicans. But Raphael tells Mike that the Mexicans won't deal with them because of what happened to Luis last season. As you remember, Luis got jumped and burned alive in his cell. And he was the shot caller for the Hispanics. Now, Mike tells him to make an alliance anyway, with a subset of the Hispanics. Raphael tells Mike he doesn't trust him. And, Mike doesn't much care. And as he leaves, he simply tells Raphael to get it done. That's Mike's thing, get it done. But as he's exiting the prison, Kareem sees him and he looks pissed off. So Kareem goes to Carney and asks, what was Mike doing there? Carney tells Kareem that Mike is doing what he does. Kareem sees Mike as a criminal at this point and nothing more. And of course, Carney doesn't agree. And he tells Kareem, Mike is doing what you can't do. And he tells Kareem that he can trust him, but Kareem doesn't seem so sure. And Carney reminds him of all that they've been through, which I think Kareem takes as a threat, because you'll remember Carney wasn't there during the prison riot, but Carney does know that Kareem killed a prisoner last season, beating him to death once he was allowed to come back to work after the old ordeal went down. So, next we see Anna meet Mike for the second time back at his office, and she tells him about a support group she's been going to before asking him what happened to the man that killed his brother, Rip Mitch. Mitch tells her that the cops found him right away and that he didn't make it. And she tells Mike that he and his family were lucky, and then she leaves. Now, this conversation is important, and I knew when I heard it that we would find out why before the episode cut to black. After that, Mike gets a call from Kyle asking if he's spoken to Iris. And, he tells Mike that they sent her to the store, but that she's been gone for hours. And, he then asks Mike to come by and see the baby. And, as this conversation is happening, Mike gets a call from Evelyn, who asks him to meet her at the morgue. Now, at the jail, Iris is still being belligerent with the police officer, and she refuses to be fingerprinted. And I think this will be important as well, because there's definitely a reason she has been resisting law enforcement all episode long. It's almost like she does not want to be identified at any cost. Like maybe she's not who she's been saying she is, or maybe she's done some super wild shit in the past and is afraid she may have warrants and doesn't want to go to prison. So I'm wondering if Iris and Mike, like I said, will finally be separated by Iris going to jail, like doing some real time. And that could be really, really interesting in my opinion. But, I told you guys, I thought that Iris should have got the hell on early in season 2 when she had the chance to go with Pro after she snitched on Milo. But she couldn't bring herself to leave Mr. Mike. And even though she refused to do anything he asked her to do until the very end of the season. But, I digress. Anyway, Mike and Evelyn meet at the morgue, and she, asks Mike for help reluctantly, after, she kind of went ham on Mike at the end of last season. And so they kind of fell out, and she was like, Mike, I'm coming for you too. And so, but now she's asking for his help, and Mike seems to kind of revel in this moment. But he does tell Evelyn that this isn't his problem, that it's, a problem for, the Bureau of Prisons and for Kingstown PD. And he even tells her that he doesn't even really know what's happening yet. So next, we find Miss Sharon dead in her car right outside the prison. And Ian and Stevie get the call. Now, Kareem's on the scene, but he doesn't seem interested in helping KPD at this point. And, it's kind of one of those things where, like I said, Kareem is just kind of distancing himself from all of the people who kind of roll with Mike. And, I think that's going to come to a head at some point this season as well. We see Kyle is still at home with Tracy trying to put together something for the baby, maybe some kind of bassinet or something like that, when Big Rob and his wife Patty show up with a gift. It's a stroller that, separates into a car seat. It's, super domestic, right? So it was kind of funny to watch the boys kind of, go back and forth about how this is a great stroller, blah, 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 whatever. That was interesting to see two super kind of violent men kind of going, oh, you can take the seat off and it can use as a car seat and it snaps right back on. And it's just, that was kind of funny. But the boys go into the kitchen to have a beer. And Kyle tells Rob that he's tired of the runaround in KPD and that he wants to be able to make a difference somehow. and he's thinking about being transferred to SWAT. But Rob kind of shuts it down, and he tells him that whenever, he's, the crap hits the fan, so to speak, that Kyle either seems too angry to do what he needs to do or too afraid. And if you've watched this show to this point, you can see exactly why Rob feels that way about Kyle, because it does seem like he's either too angry or too afraid. He's never kind of even keeled like he needs to be to do what needs to be done. Well, anyway, he tells Kyle that he's better off staying where he is. And, I think Kyle's got to get his crap together, because Kyle's just kind of been all over the place ever since the show started. He just hasn't been settled. And, I just wonder what that's about. Now, Ian and Mike are at the cafe, Ian's eating and Mike's just kind of chilling. And they're talking about the drugs and about the fact that Sharon was found dead in a car belonging to her brother Lucas outside the prison. So that's not Sharon's car, that's her brother Lucas's car. And Ian tells him, Mike, that Lucas has a place in town, but that he went by there already and it seems abandoned. And Mike asks if there's anybody new in town, and Ian tells him about the arrival of Constantine. So Ian from KPD knows that Constantine's in town. And Mike mentions that Constantine's men must have been the ones that took out Milo at the end of last season. And, just then, Carney shows up to speak to Mike, and the group leaves the restaurant. And this conversation was important because we still don't know if the main drama is coming from the Aryans or the Russians. And I think it's still a bit too early to speculate in either direction. And, that just means the writers are doing a good job at covering their tracks for now. So, check back with me in the next video or two, and I should have a clearer guess on which way the wind is blowing there. Now, outside the cafe, Carney complains to Mike about Kareem. And Mike tells him that, Kareem has PTSD from the prison riot. And Carney explains that it's not his fault that he wasn't there when the riot took place. He says, I didn't schedule around it, and that he wasn't going to apologize for not getting SA'd by the prisoners, like Kareem did. And then he hints to Mike that Kareem, got even for what happened to him, which seems to make Mike perk up a bit. And when he asks Carney what he means by that, Carney just simply goes, nothing. So it appears that Carney's going to continue to keep Kareem's secret for now. And I don't know about you guys, but I absolutely think this is information that Mike may use at a later date to kind of force Kareem's hand if he needs something done inside the prison. So, just stay tuned for that. Now, Mike and Ian arrive at Lucas's place, and, they knock on the door. Lucas answers, and they enter. And there's drug paraphernalia all over the place, but they seem uninterested in busting him. Mike's not a cop, and Ian is a cop sometimes, right? But they ask him about his sister, and he tells them that he doesn't know what she's up to, but that she wouldn't skim off money. And so that's the great mystery right now. Who exactly is stepping on the drugs that, Sharon was passing out, if not her? And, everyone keeps saying that she's a loyal soldier and that she would never betray Bunny. So right now, that's the very big piece of this puzzle that's missing. Something we can't see just yet. And again, gold star for the writers for kind of keeping us in the dark. The goal of the writers at this point should be to keep us in the dark about that for as long as possible. Anyway, after Mike and Ian determine that he doesn't know anything, they finally tell him that his sister is no longer with us. And Lucas, devastated by the news, immediately starts shooting up as the pair just kind of leave him to his devices. Now, back at the office, where Mike is currently sleeping, because he doesn't want to sleep at the cabin because it's hunting season and bear season, so he doesn't want to accidentally get shot by, crazy, hunters who are in the area, hunting for sport. But he calls Iris and he gets no answer. We know because she's in jail. But he asks where she is and if she's doing okay in her voicemail. And he wonders if she's finally just taken off. So keep in mind, last episode, he told Iris that she could stay or she could go. And so I'm sure in his mind, that's why he's not paying too much, attention to what Kyle is saying. Hey, Iris might be missing, because in Mike's mind, he's thinking, well, maybe she just finally left. So in the next scene, we've got Anna for a third time. And, hey, I'm a very kind of, I can be an OCD screenwriter. So the third time for me is always a charm. So, anyway, she tells Mike that Greg was released, and then she gives Mike a wad of cash. But Mike tries to give it back to her, but she won't take it. And that gesture let me know that this was going to be the last time that Mike was going to see her, so to speak, at least. And in this conversation, she looked very much like a woman prepared to throw her life away. And it was at this point that I knew exactly how the B story of this episode was going to end. But I'll get to that in a second. So Mike gets on the road, and while he's driving, he calls Bestie Bunny, and he tells him that he has bigger problems than a bad batch of drugs. He tells Bunny that someone is targeting him, specifically. So, what we now know is that someone is waging war against Bunny. But when Bunny asks Mike who he thinks it is, Mike says he doesn't know. And again, like I said, right now, neither do we. And this is a real tension-building moment, So again, good work for the writers. Meanwhile, in the prison, Gunnar gets a visit from his daughter, not in the visiting room, where you can sit face to face, but, through the glass where you get on the phone and you talk to each other. And, he tells her that his charges were finally dropped. Boy, he really got the short end of this whole thing because, really, Mike agreed that all of them would get their charges dropped. But Blood Pirate Buddy, he's no longer with us. Luis, he's no longer with us. And Bunny's the only one that Mike really, went to bat for to try to get out. And he just kind of left Gunnar in there, But Gunnar kind of went back on their agreement by moving the drugs last season with the drones. But still, Gunnar kind of got the short end of the stick, and then he got shanked. So, but just, his daughter seems to be relieved to hear that he's about to get out, and they're making plans about spending time together. And just then, Mr. Norseman appears behind him and puts a bag over my man's head and just suffocates him right in front of his daughter as she's standing there screaming and banging on the other side of the glass for him to stop. So this had to be the work of Merle, but why? And the only thing I can think of is that it's a hostile takeover of the Aryan gang. I guess, the way that it works is that Merle was a shot caller in the other prison, and now Merle wants to be the shot caller in Anchor Bay. And so I guess Gunnar had to go. And Merle wanted that number one spot pretty bad. So, I guess we'll find out why next week, because there's a reason why Merle got himself transferred to Anchor Bay. And I surmise that Mike will have something to say about it. I even think that maybe Mike knows Merle, maybe from the past somehow. And we'll kind of get the pieces to that story. Hopefully, maybe even in the next episode. So, Mike finally shows up at the house, and he parks in the driveway, and he can see Kyle and Tracy and the baby through the window. And he kind of sits there watching them, and then he just backs out of the driveway and he just drives off. And I think that scene is just kind of showing us that Mike is starting to kind of distance himself from Kyle. I think maybe because Mike is like, okay, now Kyle's, our mom is already gone, and it's because of the Milo thing, and I brought all this kind of drama into the family. So now that Kyle has the baby, he's kind of going to protect the baby. I'm going to just kind of keep my distance, and that's just what I think is happening there. And next, we see Anna waiting at a bus stop. It's nighttime. She's waiting at the bus stop, and it turns out Greg is also at this bus stop, but we don't know it yet, because we haven't seen who Greg is. But the bus arrives at the stop, and Greg attempts to get on. And at that moment, Anna calls out to him. He stops, and he looks in her direction, and she just guns him down with, all the witnesses. It's like, again, like I said, you got the sense that she didn't mind maybe going to jail for this. This is just something that had to get done. And like I said, she's a woman who seemed fully prepared to throw her life away over her son's death. How she was feeling about it was just too much for her to go on the way she was going on. And so that's how our B story ends. So lastly, Mike ends up at Evelyn's crib, and he knocks on the door, and she opens it, and she seems pretty relieved to see him. Not necessarily happy, but relieved. And I think these are just two people who have just been beat down by Kingstown as a whole, and so they kind of drown their sorrows in each other. You know what I mean? It's not going to be a healthy relationship of any kind. And I think, like I said, Evelyn is the substitute for what maybe Mike and Iris would have been. She lets him in, like I said, and we all know what he came for if you've been watching this show. So, like I said, I guess the two of them have just decided, you know what? We need each other. despite everything that's the seesawing back and forth, and her being the DA now, and Mike kind of working for the criminals in her eyes, just like Kareem sees him as a criminal working for criminals. So does Evelyn, but she can't leave him alone, and Mike can't stay away from her either. So I guess this is just what's going to happen. That's going to be the love interest, the toxic love interest that is in Mike's life at this point. So in conclusion, like I said, this episode was a bit slow. And, but I didn't mind it because, to me, it simply functioned as a continuation of the setup. I always tell people that TV shows do still have a similar structure to movie scripts, even though, you have like an A, B, and a C story, and those stories tend to run concurrently as you get through the episode. But if you look at an episode season, for example, it still will have the same kind of arc that a movie has, just extrapolated over, say, 10 episodes. And, in this case with Mayor of Kingstown, it's an hour-long drama, so 450, 500 pages. It's like a 500-page movie. You know what I mean? So we're still in the setup phase. And I'm not exactly sure of how much more of our vegetables we're going to have to eat before we get to the main course. But I suspect things will start to pick up next episode, where we'll finally get to, whatever the catalyst for the season is going to be, whatever that big reveal is, and then Mike can just go. Light turns green, and Mike can just go. Now, right now, we've got two characters in fairly grave circumstances, that being Bunny, who's trying to figure out who's coming for him, and Iris, who's, just trying to figure out what the rest of her life is going to be. But I also think that Mike is perpetually in danger, even if it doesn't always feel that way in the moment. Mike is always the one who's going to be placed, in jeopardy as he kind of tries to navigate this, the circumstances that he has to manage in Kingstown. And I think this season has a chance to be much, much, much more interesting than last season was. And it may even have a chance to be more interesting, not necessarily better, mind you, but more interesting than season 1 in some ways. But what do you guys think? Did you enjoy the second episode of the new season? If so, what's your favorite storyline so far? What characters are you most afraid of so far? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. Also, be sure to go and check out themadscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write, and I'll catch y'all in the next video.